Good afternoon, everyone. It has been, only yesterday where we witnessed the Miami Grand Prix, which saw Lando Norris take his maiden victory in F1, beating Verstappen by over 7 seconds when it came to the finish of the race. We also saw Hamilton struggling in the sprint, battling with both Haas cars in the sprint and the race, finishing outside the points for the sprint, but then recovering back to 6th place in the main race. And also Daniel Ricciardo with a surprising 4th place finish in the sprint before dropping back to where he's usually been, I suppose, this season in P15. We shall be talking about all of this and more here on the Warwick F1 show. I am once again joined by Chinmay and Will Kingswood, and we have our guest James for today. First off, what do we think of that race? If I go to James, to you first, what exactly did we think compared to perhaps the previous races that we've seen this season?
Well, it was great to see Lando winning, different winner for once, and Red Bull not dominating. I mean, the wheel-to-wheel action wasn't brilliant. This is Miami. It is a race around a car park, but it was great to see a different winner, refreshing, and it bodes well for the rest of the season. If McLaren are looking good on a track where we weren't expecting them to be strong and able to win a race, it bodes well for the rest of the season, and Ferrari looking good as well.
Yeah, certainly a very unexpected dominance from Norris there in the second half of the race, which made some perhaps different action to what we were expecting from the first half of the race. Chinmay, Will, what do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to say that this Lando dominance, it needs to stop, man. It's been too much. But it's so good to see Lando finally win his first race. Obviously he did get really lucky with the safety car. Obviously, and also, if you've checked, and those of you who've checked Twitter this morning, obviously, apparently Donald Trump has some credit to claim as well for Lando's win, because from his endorsement apparently. Actually, to be honest, it was a much better race than expected as well. In considering, to be honest, yes, obviously Lando did win, but there actually wasn't much to happen up front. Because the only real bit was a safety car restart, because most of it was just Max Verstappen driving until he hit the bollard. We'll probably get to that. Then safety car, Lando obviously managed to pit, and then so I mean we didn't see too much on track action. I don't think so, because otherwise the rest of it was just either Hamilton stuck behind Perez or Leclerc stuck behind Piastri. There wasn't actually overtaking, but obviously we saw stuff like the Alpine scrapping, and even especially throughout midfield, there's so many overtakes, and it was quite a nice Grand Prix to watch for once.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think at the start of the race, it kind of settled into what we were expecting it to be. Obviously, Verstappen up the front, but even then, he wasn't gaining the sort of time we've seen him gain over the last few races. He wasn't kind of putting in those laps that would take him half a second, then a second, then a second 0.3, and so on ahead. And then obviously we get the safety car, and to be honest, it is lucky for Lando Norris. I don't think you can deny that, but he made his own luck by being the only person who stretched the medium tyres that long to get into that position where a safety car could benefit. And I know I will probably come onto it, but with the whole how did the safety car rules work? Should it have let Verstappen pass earlier? Because obviously Norris at one point I think was about half a lap ahead of everyone else. I think either way, if Norris had come out maybe behind Verstappen, the pace he showed at the end of the race, kind of suggests that maybe we would have had that battle for the lead. But either way, I think it was an enjoyable race. I think we saw a lot of battles up and down the field, especially after the safety car. But that's just a thing that can happen. You can't say, oh, without the safety car, this would have been boring. The safety car happened, and because it happened, we did see those battles. We did see drivers kind of competing for those positions. So much better than I think I was expecting. Definitely for me so far the best race of the season, and yeah, hopefully we can get something a bit more like that over the next few races.
Yeah, certainly some interesting talking points from all of those. As we mentioned, maybe not that exciting of a race given the race winner, because I guess we sort of had two periods of dominance, the first being Verstappen, then the safety car period, and then Lando Norris with his 7-second advantage at the end. But perhaps it's kind of, or maybe the way I thought about it in a way was that we're kind of surprised how good it was, because as James mentioned, it's sort of a car park track where we don't expect that much from the Miami Grand Prix. But we'll head straight into winners and spinners then. And, well, the first one we've already mentioned is Lando Norris. He's done an absolutely brilliant job there. James, I'll come to you first. We say that kind of Lando Norris he did get quite a bit of luck in the race, perhaps being the only one to sit on those medium tyres. But you've got to think this win has been coming realistically. He's had some amazing performances in the past, and he's been on a great run of form recently. And you've got to agree that saying that he's deserved this win at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, he's been on great form the last few years. It's shown he's a top quality driver. He had the most podiums of anyone without a win, but not anymore. And he was second place last time out in China with an excellent drive and pole for the sprint there. He had the most second places of anyone last year. It was great to see McLaren, all the work, what a difference a year makes for McLaren. I mean, a year ago, they didn't even get out of Q1, and Norris has only something like been knocked out in Q1 3 times in his career or something, and one of them was at Miami last year, when he finished 17th in the race. Even what a difference a day makes being punted out at the first corner of the sprint.
Yeah, certainly. It's definitely an amazing performance from Norris, and we talked about him at the start, I think, or near the start of the season, where having rumours that he was linked with other teams. Chinmay, Will, do you guys think that perhaps with this result that he's more likely to stay at McLaren now, and he's seeing McLaren as a potential future with him getting more race wins?
I mean, the team he was mostly linked to was Red Bull. You can kind of get why he'd be interested in them. Like they have been like by far the quickest team overall for about the last 18 months minimum. But like you look towards this, he did get that win in the McLaren. It has been a win that he's deserved for some time. It's a win that had Max Verstappen not been so dominant last year would have come easily like 9-10 months ago. I mean, it's a win that could have come all the way back in 2021 when he was at one point competing with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who were on the top of their games that year as well. So he has deserved this win. I think, like, obviously there have been all the kind of the no wins, the jokes, but I think when you saw the reaction after the race, everyone seemed happy about it. Everyone just seemed happy. Everyone seemed like they wanted Norris to win. They were happy for him as well. And to be honest, yeah, I can see him staying at McLaren, because if you look to, as James said, the form last year, I think Norris finished 87 or so seconds off Verstappen in P1. And now he's finishing 5 seconds ahead. So if you take that to next year, Norris is going to be about a lap and a half ahead of the rest of the field by Miami 2025. So, like, if you look at that rate of progression, and I think they brought an upgrade to Miami that obviously clearly appears to have worked, then McLaren have that track record of improving their car. And if that continues, then realistically, you may see McLaren start to challenge Red Bull a bit more regularly. And why would Norris leave at that point when he's got a car that potentially can win races and maybe in time could even compete for the world title?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to add on what Will said. But yeah, honestly, for the time being, McLaren obviously does seem to be the best option for Lando. And especially now with Adrian Newey leaving Red Bull and so the whole turmoil happened there, we don't know how long Red Bull would sustain its dominance. I mean, I would expect them at least into the new regs, but, you know, it's especially with things going on then. Plus, yeah, I mean, especially with, you know, Ferrari's field, the only other seat would be Mercedes, and I don't think he would want to go to Mercedes than McLaren at this time. Look at the current states. But Yeah, no, but genuinely, it's going to be interesting to see how these new upgrades fare. One thing I will slightly disagree on is how effective the upgrades were. They did work, obviously, but I feel like the old spec car was still really good because if you look at Oscar Piastri's performance during the race as well, until we'll probably get on to what happened later on, but yeah, Oscar was also really, really quick, and he did not have the upgrades this weekend during the race as well. And yeah, he was pretty much on. He was only about a tenth or so slower than Verstappen on the first stint. So yeah, McLaren's going to be one to watch for the rest of the season, definitely, especially given how good they are with upgrading the car.
Yes, certainly McLaren more and more as the season progresses is looking like a serious contender for the top teams. James, if I just ask you a quick question, do you think that with the rate that McLaren are progressing, and I'm sure we kind of all expect that if Red Bull were to drop off in the next couple of seasons, then Ferrari would pick up the pieces and seeming to be the favourites for that for that world title contenders with Lewis Hamilton. Do you think McLaren are serious contenders for that, or do you think they still have that quite a bit extra to go before they're actually challenging for consistent wins, I suppose?
Not this year, but maybe possibly next year. We'll have to see how the rest of this year pans out. But I mean, it's looking very promising. I mean, Zach Brown said the upgrade was basically a B-spec car, so it's a major upgrade. Piastri only had half of it. Norris had the whole thing, and McLaren is not a track Miami is not a track where you'd expect the McLaren to go well. I mean, it's mainly straights and low-speed corners, and that is not McLaren's strength in the slightest. In fact, McLaren won fairly comfy at one of their weaker tracks, bodes well for the rest of the season, and the tracks much more favourable to them. We get to tracks like Spain, Silverstone, Hungary. Then we'll see, and we might see McLaren challenging for more wins.
Well, certainly that would make it definitely more interesting if we had some more contenders other than Carlos Sainz for the Red Bulls. And just as we mentioned, I want to quickly touch on Piastri having a decent performance in the sprint race, finishing 6th, but then having some trouble in the race. Is this obviously we talked about him having a kind of poor run of form a little bit going into this race. Will, did you think that this is maybe going from bad to worse for him, or is this more out of his control for this race?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's bad to us. Like, obviously, when your teammate is performing and is now winning races, like the pressure does ramp up a little bit. But for Piastri, I think it probably has been a step back from last year, and I think obviously we've been speaking about that a little bit for the last few weeks, but he did well this weekend. Obviously, you mentioned I think that 6th place in the sprint, and he was running. He's running second for the first stint, kind of keeping Verstappen honest is the fairest assessment of his performance up there. And then really, he was also he was running in that top 4 in the race. Obviously, he was being put under pressure by Carlos Sainz, but he's still running there, still performing. And then it just was unfortunate that Sainz opted to kind of make that move at the second to last corner and will make that move. Obviously, he's not controlled going into it. Piastri knocks his front or breaks his front wing and then kind of drops down the field. And I think you do have to remember it's still Piastri's second season in Formula One. Last year was definitely a good one for him. Obviously, we saw that win in the sprint race in Qatar. Are we getting not? I think obviously the phrase "second season slump" could spring to mind. I don't think it's as drastic as that, but perhaps maybe there has been kind of that period, and I think a lot of drivers operate on confidence. And I think if Piastri manages to string a few good races together, then you will see kind of him start to perform again and start to hopefully match Norris, because that can only benefit the McLaren team in the long run.
Yeah, and like I said, I just want to add, Piastri also didn't have upgrades this weekend as well. So, like, considering it relative to what Lando, obviously, considering Lando had the upgrades, it was expected that Lando would obviously be a lot quicker this weekend. So, considering Oscar's pace this weekend, I genuinely have, yeah, obviously he's not had the best run of form lately, relative to Lando, but I think, yeah, to be honest, I think it's just a bad run of form. He'll get back as soon as, to be honest. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about him.
Do you guys also think that the drop in pace from Verstappen was from that incident? Because that is probably, well, you think that the turning point in the race was the safety car, and realising at least my surprise, and I'm sure many other people's, that McLaren had a very good pace, so much so that they could bring out a gap from Verstappen of 7 seconds, Verstappen-esque in a way. Do we think that that's because of some damage to that Red Bull car, or was that serious pace from McLaren?
So I think I read this morning, I think they might have got floor. Obviously, you've got to take these things with a pinch of salt. They might just be trying to hide that this just wasn't a good race for them. But I think they've said the bollard gave them some floor damage, which obviously it can't be helpful for performance. But I think there is that aspect, but again, I think even had the safety car was for a different incident, obviously with Sargent and Magnussen. The bollard it was only caused the VSC, and no one really benefited from that because of the good work of the marshals getting on and getting off as quickly as possible. But it was, I think, a race that Red Bull didn't. Well, I think throughout the weekend, Red Bull, even though they were getting kind of the results, they weren't confident in the car. I think, was it Max Verstappen after his sprint pole was surprised that he was up there, and I don't think they just demonstrated that they had kind of that confidence in the car. Whereas you look towards McLaren, obviously really disappointed. Well, they not really had a session where they managed to string everything together. Hadn't done either of the qualifying sessions well. Obviously, the sprint race, Norris's sprint race only lasted one corner, so they'd not really got everything together. And even in the first half of the race, you could argue that maybe they still hadn't. But then when the things kind of fell their way, that's when McLaren really could show what they've got. And I think, honestly, on pace, you could make a reasonable argument that even with or without Verstappen's damage, that McLaren and Norris especially may have been the quickest car, like just purely on pace, purely on merit at this weekend. And did it require luck? Yes, of course it did, with the safety car to get him back into the race. But on the day, those things happen, and once Norris was there, he kind of never looked back.
Yes, certainly it's been a very good weekend for McLaren, and as we said, some things have to fall into place for that result to occur, but definitely not something that they'll be complaining about. I'm going to move on though to another driver who has had a very good sprint race, at least, which is Daniel Ricciardo. I'm sure we're sick and tired of talking about Daniel Ricciardo on this podcast, but this time we've actually got something good to talk about him, finishing in P4, just missing out on the podium for the Miami sprint race. And I think he said in a report after that race that he had to silence a few people or something like that. I think he was talking about me and Chinmay when we were dissing him on our 2024 driver reviews. But yeah, so I wanted to, I guess, ask a question to the floor. Has Ricciardo, obviously we know he's got quite a bit to prove if he wants to keep that seat for the foreseeable future at RB Visa Cash App, however you will. Has he done enough with that result, or is he still? Is it still a question of whether he's going to need to do more?
I think he still needs to do more. He needs to show he can perform consistently rather than just the occasional flashes of the old Ricciardo, and he needs to be able to achieve that consistently. Like at McLaren, we saw occasional flashes like that victory at Monza a few other strong performances, but he needs to be able to do that regularly if he wants to stay at RB or even get back in that Red Bull.
Yeah, no, fully agreed. But yeah, and the thing is as well, obviously, as we all know, the first point of comparison in Formula One will always be your teammate. And Yuki Tsunoda did do a decent race as well. And the races where you get the bulk of the points. And Ricciardo was scrapping out towards the back. Yuki Tsunoda was fighting for the points. And that's been the case for pretty much the whole season so far, consistently. So Ricciardo would need to start pushing towards Yuki Tsunoda's pace on a regular basis, or at least start beating him, at least. Then maybe he can get that Red Bull. But yeah, I think, and like James said, it can't just be showing flashes of brilliance. There needs to be more consistency.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Consistency is kind of key for Ricciardo at the moment, and he, like as we've said, he's shown flashes in the past. If you think back to Monza 21, I think it was Mexico 2022, where he suddenly really started to perform after his collision with Tsunoda. But we saw the P4 on Saturday. You're thinking, oh my gosh, Ricciardo can perform. He's doing really well. And then, what's it, 4 or 5 hours later, he's knocked out in Q1, and it kind of just goes right back to, oh, does Daniel Ricciardo is he taking up a seat in the junior Red Bull outfit? And like as Chinmay said, Tsunoda maybe didn't have the best sprint race, but in the race where the majority of the points were gathered, he, I think, came in 7th. And when you look at the driver's standings, he is now ahead of Lance Stroll, which I don't think many people perhaps were expecting, given the relative strengths of the Aston Martin and the RB. So he's still got to be compared to his teammate. If he can do this again, if he can get those P7s, P8s in the main race in Imola, in Spain, in Monaco, or races like that, then there are more discussions to be had about whether Ricciardo maybe does have that form again. But when you're following up, don't get me wrong, was an incredibly impressive performance of getting that P4. But when you're following it up with then being eliminated in P18, people are gonna think, oh, this was just a flash in the pan. It's not something that he can put in on a consistent basis, and those questions are still going to be asked rather than kind of falling away with the performances.
Yes, certainly, and we shouldn't also forget as well that although I guess it was this big headline that Ricciardo did finish 4th, is actually his teammate did score more points than him in the overall weekend. Yuki Tsunoda got 1 point from his P8 finish in the sprint, and then he came 7th in the race yesterday, getting 7 points. So actually, it was I guess if you statistically wise, it was a better weekend for him. And as well, do we think that kind of, I guess it's obviously, a 4th place is a 4th place. It's a brilliant result for him, and perhaps the kind of motivation that he needed. But is it maybe the nature of the circuit in a way that helped him keep that position? Because he was obviously took a few laps for Perez to get past him, and then under pressure from Carlos Sainz by the end of the race. And there's certainly very limited opportunities in, as we've said, this car park of a track where with an awful sector 3 that you just have to kind of nurture your way around. And is it a bit like, I guess almost in a bit like, in my mind, the same as Monaco 2018, where it's kind of Ricciardo's down on pace, but because of the actual limited amount of overtaking opportunities, he was managed to keep that 1st place for the victory. Obviously not on the scale of Monaco, but still kind of the same ideas. Was it pure pace from Ricciardo that got him that 4th place, or did the nature of the circuit kind of help him out a little bit?
I think probably a bit of both. You're looking at, like, the circuit is incredibly difficult to overtake. You can just kind of follow the car ahead of you. I think, well, if we take an example from the main race, Lewis Hamilton, I'm pretty sure, was in the DRS zone of Perez for about the last 20 odd laps, and I don't think ever really even got close to kind of overtaking. Obviously, perhaps that is to do with the fact the Mercedes is a bit of a yacht in straight lines. But we might come on to that. But no, I think Ricciardo. We can't minimize what Ricciardo did in a midfield car. He was able to hold up like two Ferraris, and hold on, or was able to hold up kind of front runner cars and hold on to that P4 finish. The track, as I said, obviously plays a factor. I think as well what you saw was that there was maybe that, like, the word trepidation kind of is springing to mind, but I think that's the best one in that obviously there is a qualifying a few hours after, and if you're Carlos Sainz, you don't want to be compromising that when the majority of the points can be won. It's 1 point gained versus potentially 12, 15, 10 loss. So I think playing it cautious, and realistically, Ricciardo had something to prove, so probably wasn't going to be the most cautious in terms of his defending. So I think a number of factors just kind of played a role in holding Ricciardo there, but I don't think that should take away from what was a very good performance.
Yeah, certainly kind of a very good performance in the sprint, but not very successful wise, and really not helped from his qualifying performance, as we mentioned, in P18 for the race. And as we said, as Will just said, another team that's perhaps a mixed bag of a weekend is Mercedes. Again, another one that we've covered quite a bit on this podcast, showing not very good pace in, I'd say really the weekend as a whole, to be honest. Hamilton was bogged down battling both Hasses in kind of the last positions of the points, and obviously getting a penalty as well, which meant that in the sprint, Russell finished 12th and Hamilton finished all the way down in 16th with that drive-through penalty at the end of the race. But then, come the main race, perhaps a little bit of fortune, they finished 6th and 8th place. So I guess, obviously they've not had very good pace in the past, but James, if I could just come to you for a second, is that kind of performance the thing that they needed with a little bit of luck, where they can get both drivers with getting some decent points, and from that they can kind of build on? Or is this still not where they want to be as such?
Well, it was certainly a positive step, the fact they got both cars on the points, and Hamilton seemed to be keeping pace with Perez reasonably well. But at the same time, it is clearly fourth fastest at best. When he got McLaren and Ferrari competing for victory, Mercedes, it's a bit disappointing for a team of Mercedes' stature to do that badly. I mean, I'm not quite sure we fully saw Ferrari's pace, but I think they had the pace to win the race as well if things had gone their way.
I mean, I think as Mercedes, this is where you are. They're not competing with McLaren, with Red Bull, and with Ferrari. It is very much kind of when those teams, there's not much of a gap. So when those teams fall back, you are seeing them kind of compete with them. I mean, we saw Hamilton closing on Perez, but realistically, they're getting bogged down by the Hasses, by the RBs, by the Aston Martins to a certain extent. I think Hamilton in the sprint race, obviously, perhaps would have done better had, I don't want to say crimes not been committed against him, but Kevin Magnussen, I think, driving standards, and to be honest, fair play to him for admitting it as well, but his driving was perhaps left a little bit to be desired in terms of its quality. I think it was kind of the race you saw the main issues for Mercedes. I think, well, I wouldn't say they lucked into their places. I think that was probably where they deserved to be on the merits of their car. But you just see the biggest issue with the Mercedes at the moment is if they want downforce, they have to compromise so much on straight line speed that even with DRS, they cannot get anywhere. It's much more difficult for them to get anywhere near a driver that realistically, they are probably quicker than. I think it's fair to say, it may be fair to say, but at least it seemed like Hamilton perhaps did have the measure of pace on Perez, at least at the end, or at the kind of back end of the race, but he was getting nowhere near just because that Red Bull is a quick car in a straight line, and the Mercedes is so slow that even with their DRS, they're not able to get anywhere near. They're not able to overtake, and they're not able to utilize kind of the downforce that they put on the car to make it quicker. And I think that is their main problem at the moment, is that so much has to be sacrificed to or for that car to work that it makes it, if you're not operating in perfect conditions, if you are stuck behind another driver who is slower than you, that has more straight line speed, then you can't utilize that, and ultimately that limits kind of what Mercedes can do and what points positions they can end up in.
Is that possibly though? I just if I sorry intervene here. It's like, is that possibly as well a little bit due to, as we mentioned, a little bit with Ricciardo, with Norris, with the nature of the circuit, because that is really the only overtaking opportunities that Miami has, is those at the end with the DRS at the end of the straight line, of the kind of back straights, if you like, and because they couldn't take advantage of that and fell so behind under even with DRS that they weren't able to make up much positions, and Hamilton at least did kind of get bogged down from the Hasses.
I think a little bit, but I remember back to, I think the sprint race is probably the best example of this. You were seeing laps where Lewis Hamilton was basically up Kevin Magnussen's, like he was under his rear wing, basically coming out of the long, kind of the long left-hander before the first DRS zone. He was up his rear wing, and still he wasn't able to really get past him. Obviously, there were some laps where he was getting past him, and then Magnussen was making dive bombs from Louisiana by that point to kind of get back side by side. But if the Mercedes had that straight line speed, I don't think though that would have been an option. And when you are like less than 2/10 coming out of a corner onto a straight and you can't make that position stick, it really raises questions about kind of what that straight line speed is doing, and whether there has been too much sacrifice, and whether it does seem to be that car needs perfect conditions to operate, and if it doesn't have them, then you are seeing it suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly, as we mentioned, quite them needing to sacrifice maybe quite a bit for their performances. Chinmay, do you think that if I don't mind if I just come to you with is this would Mercedes, Toto Wolff, Lewis Hamilton, Russell, do they see this as a good performance because this is where they are on the grid, or is this they still believe that they have the potential to do better if they make the right upgrades in their car?
I believe they should, but knowing Toto Wolff, he doesn't. Knowing Toto Wolff and the way he's been acting, I don't think so. He'll see this as a good performance. I don't think he sees any week as a good performance unless he's on the podium. I think the reality is that Mercedes car, like Will's just been explaining, is just simply not good enough to be challenging the podiums just yet. It's just the amount they have to sacrifice in order to get some form of cornering performance. I mean, but yeah, it is what it is. They just haven't hit the ground running with their new design philosophy, and yeah, I think, to be honest, this is the best they can do for the time being. They've got no straight line speed, and unfortunately, the nature of a lot of tracks in Formula One these days require you to have some form of straight line speed to make those overtakes. So at Miami, next race in Imola, you're gonna have to have some good acceleration. So hopefully, well, let's see if the Mercedes are going to be stuck behind Pierre Gasly again. But Pierre Gasly is not in an AlphaTauri this time, so let's see. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, certainly perhaps some ground to build on. But there's one more point I would like to cover before we move on to reviewing our predictions. Probably the greatest piece of news that we've had on this podcast ever. Alpine, they've done it. They have scored their first point of the season. Ocon managing to finish P10, moving them into a solid 8th in the Constructors' Championship. Of course, I'm not being serious, but yes, does anyone have anything to comment? I mean, Alpine got a point. It's still a dreadful season for them. Is that Chinmay celebrating? What did we think?
I mean, I think regardless of how maybe they start, and obviously when they started, Alpine were the worst car out of those kind of bottom, realistically, 3 teams. Like, I think it's fair to now put Haas in like that, like Haas are like prime midfield, and then you've got maybe RB as well. They're perhaps a bit better, but the bottom 3 of like Sauber, Williams, and Alpine realistically the most likely to develop their car. And when on days like this, you've got to put yourself in those positions where maybe you've seen one of the top 4 teams, the drivers, been knocked out of the points positions, as we saw with Piastri. The other 2, 9th and 10th, are the Aston Martins, who I think it's fair to say had a really anonymous race, really not performing, and just not really a good weekend for them. There's 3 points so now there's 3 points positions up for grabs, and you've got to come and take them. And we saw that with Tsunoda getting points, and we've seen that with Ocon getting points. And I think although Alpine did start badly at the start of the season, that's undeniable, I don't think they'll be at the back by the end of the season. I think just their development and the fact that they probably do have those resources and that expertise and like just the knowledge they built over the last few years of being able to score points, I think this will be the start of a few points positions for Alpine. Maybe not that many, and maybe not enough to kind of compete with probably RB and Haas, but probably easily enough to secure that P8 in the Constructors, which, I mean, as you've said, Callum, is still a really, really bad showing for them, especially when you've considered kind of where they've been for the last few years.
Yeah, certainly. James, if you don't mind, if I just come to you, what do we think the potential of Alpine actually is this season? Obviously, they've started the lowest that they could probably ever start, and we're aware that they have vast resources, vast investment going into that car. Where do we think that they will be by the end of the season? Are they going to be bogged down in kind of the bottom of the midfield, battling the Hasses, the Saubers, or is it just like McLaren where they just need a couple of upgrades and then they could be right up there?
I think if they have some good upgrades, they could probably get up to 6th, so ahead of RB and Haas. They are a factory team after all, a big manufacturer owned by Renault. At the same time, they've never shown anything that suggests they're going to be able to regularly challenge for podiums and wins really ever since they've been in F1. So I don't think the top 5 teams are in reach at all, but they might get 6th if they have some good upgrades in the rest of the season. Maybe just about up to where they were last year.
Yeah, I certainly think if they from where they started, if they could get back to where they were, at least that would be, I'd say, you'd have to think that they'd have to call that a successful season realistically. But unless anyone else has any honourable mentions, then or any other points, Chinmay, go for it.
For me, it's a spinner. It's the Ferrari special livery.
Oh yeah, that was underwhelming. That could have been so much better.
The amount they teased, the fact that they were going to go for a blue livery, their blue race suits were absolutely amazing, and then there's like how it's literally just HP logos all over the car, and also I think that's also another reason that hindered Ferrari from actually winning the race, the HP logos.
Yeah, actually, for me, as I don't think we've mentioned it enough, Kevin Magnussen and his weekend, which I think can only be described as unique, 65 seconds worth of time penalties, including 30 in the sprint race, for just
That's impressive. You got.
Let's just call it extreme driving.
Showing.
Yeah, extreme driving against Lewis Hamilton. But to be fair to him, and this is like a bit of a weird thing to say, he did come out and say after it, yes, I was just driving badly. That was the plan to kind of leave Hulkenberg in the points, and he was honest about it, which I think you've got to give him credit for.
Yeah.
I mean,
what a team player.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even Lewis after was like, yeah, he came up to me and said I was doing that. And I think we don't see much, or like when you see drivers kind of driving poorly, there's a lot of excuses that are often being thrown around. So it's almost a bit refreshing to kind of see someone say, yeah, was doing that. It was all me. I was doing
honest,
it badly.
Yeah.
Like, I was doing it for the team, and like, yeah, fair enough to Magnussen for missing it. But honest, like watching it as a Hamilton fan was quite painful, I will say, on the Saturday.
Well, certainly, if that was his idea, then Hulkenberg got up to 7th with a 2-point finish in the sprint. So whatever he did obviously worked. Whether that can be excused with the 65 seconds of penalty, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's now 2 points away from a race ban, so he's going to have to be a bit more careful. I think that's kind of the end of Kevin Magnussen's, I'd say, defence arc, I think, is the most diplomatic way of putting it.
No, and I think James mentioned it before we started as well, that none of it's actually like dropping off till next year. I say Max would just go for an Imola, just do no holds barred driving, get the race ban, and just reset it. I think that's the best thing to do. And Max said he would do it.
Yeah, they've just got to work out like their worst race, and like he's just got to do it the race before. So he can have that one off, and realistically, actually, like that's where Behrman could pop in the car and get a bit of experience maybe in that Haas before he potentially jumps in.
I'd say with that logic, you may as well say that could Magnussen just do us all a favour and just slam into Verstappen on the first turn and make the race a bit more interesting. Although it actually was Verstappen's teammate who almost did that in the race as well. That was very close. But anyway, we'll get on to our predictions that we made for Miami. So I'll obviously the other Will can be here unfortunately today. So I've got his predictions here, which we'll read out. I don't know about you guys, but I had. Again, a mediocre weekend, which I guess we can say mostly. None of my 1, 2, or 3 point predictions coming through. Will, if you wanted to start with how yours got on.
Well, so this is now the second time I have been given the 1 slot, and it is now the second time that Verstappen hasn't won a race this season.
If you can have as the host of this show, you can now have you can now have the first place prediction for every weekend, because if this is the races that we deliver, Australia and then this, then yes.
Honestly, there might be an argument to be made, because like the other, so when Chinmay and when Will's had it, like Verstappen's just been dominating. But as soon as I get the first pick and pick Verstappen, then it seems to go away. And if that's what it takes, I'll be willing to sacrifice my points for a good F1 season. But no. So obviously I did go Verstappen P1. Didn't end up finishing there in P2, so still got 1 point. I went Perez P2. He was where did Perez finish? Was he P4 in the end?
P4 after Sainz's penalty.
Yes. Oh, did Sainz get a penalty?
Yeah, he got a 5-second penalty, dropped him behind Perez.
Okay. And then I did get a 3-pointer. I went Leclerc P3. Then Norris obviously won the race, but I went for P4, so that's another point. And then Piastri, I went 5th place. Was looking good at 1 point, but obviously after his collision with Sainz dropping him out of the top 5. So that is 6 points from my top 5. My 1, 2, and 3, I went for 4 celeb shots in the race, and there must have been.
Can I just say, while you're saying that, right, something that I thought to bring up on this podcast, the amount of times that they panned the camera to Camila Cabello over the entire weekend really did annoy me. And I saw that and I thought, yes, you're getting that 1 point prediction. It was very annoying, I must say. But yes, good for you getting the points, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was quite a slam dunk 1 pointer, but I think after the second time Verstappen doesn't win when I predict him to, I almost deserve it. Otherwise, I went Red Bull max points over the weekend. Obviously, didn't happen. They didn't win in the actual race. And then 2x2 for the top 8 finishing grid, and again, kind of scuppered a little bit by Norris's win. So that is for me 7 points for the weekend.
A fairly respectable weekend then for Will. Chinmay, how did your predictions get on?
So I got all top 5 correct, but in the wrong order. I did predict Leclerc first place, but that's because just tactical, because he always ends up in different positions. I put Perez second, ended up 4th. I put Norris third, obviously won the race. Sainz, I did put Sainz 4th, but unfortunately he did get the 5-second penalty. So I was quite close to that. And then I did the tactical Verstappen 5th, so I got the full 5 from there. And my 1, 2, and 3 pointer, I was quite close with a couple of them, but didn't get them. But first, my 1 pointer, there was actually quite a strong 1 pointer. There was a no repetition in the podium places. So the first place in the sprint can't be first place in the race. And second place can't be second in the race, to put it that way. And in the sprint race, there was a Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez podium. But then in the main race, it was Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc. So it was actually a different order each time. So yeah, at least I can say I got that 1 pointer. My 2 pointer was Daniel Ricciardo v Yuki Tsunoda in the main race, which is quite annoying because he did it in the sprint. But then, yeah. And then the 3 pointer was both Alpines beat both Kick Saubers in both races. In the main race, the Alpines finished 10th and 12th, while the Saubers finished 14th and 16th. But in the sprint race, Gasly finished 9th, and then Joe and Bottas finished 11th and 14th respectively, and then Ocon finished 15th. So, fortunately, I was so close, but no.
Very close then for that 3-point prediction. And it comes to the point in the episode now where I have to issue a public apology to Will Biddles for screwing up his predictions for this weekend. So I did not do so well. So exactly like Chinmay, I got the correct drivers in the top 5, but all in the incorrect order. I think realistically, if you're going to pick both Ferraris, both Red Bulls and Lando Norris for a lot of the races this season, then you're in good contention, but got none of them in the right order. So I put Sainz first. Obviously, he finished P5. Then the Leclerc, Perez, Norris, and then I went with the tactical Verstappen P5, thinking he'd be on the top step of the podium in the main race. This is for, and obviously we know what happened. And then none of my 1, 2, or 3 point predictions came through. Verstappen wins by 10 seconds. I said that for either race, and he only finished 3 seconds ahead of Leclerc in the sprint race, and obviously didn't win in the main race. I said no safety cars in either race. That was destroyed by about 30 seconds into the sprint race. And I said for either race, both Haas drivers finishing in the top 8. Obviously, none finishing in the top 8 for the main race. And then only Hülkenberg finishing in P7 after Magnussen sacrificed himself for that. So I get 5 points for that. So not too bad a weekend for all of us. I don't know where that leaves us in the standings. Do we?
I think Chinmay might have moved ahead a little bit more. I might have caught up a few points, and then I think Will's sat in the middle.
Yeah, no. Well, if you're listening, I apologise. But so that's So a bit of a change around, but then quite similar points for all of us. So before we round off the episode, is there anything else that anyone has to add to the episode? No?
No. Well, actually, just well done, Lando Norris.
Just how easy we could have had different winners. If the safety car come up one lap earlier, Piastri would have been in the lead.
Well, yes, I suppose so, because it was Sainz and Piastri that...
Yeah, Piastri would have been in the lead.
Because they just pitted before the safety car, yes. So in that way, that's how Norris got very, very lucky, I suppose. Yeah. And yes. Well, I guess all the luck of racing and the luck of the timing of the safety car, but like we said, good for Norris being able to stretch out those mediums to actually put himself in that position.
Yeah.
But anyway, we will round off the episode there. So thank you very much for Chinmay, Will, and James for joining me. I've been your host, Callum, and until next time, goodbye.